name is Erin Kuester. You may recognize me from the content creation workshop. If you didn't attend the content creation workshop, here's a little bit of information about myself. So I have a master's degree in applied linguistics that I got in 2014. So it's been like 10 years now since I did my linguistics education. I worked as a university level ESL instructor. So I did that for about 10 years before making the transition into learning and development and instructional design in 2020. Right at the very beginning of the pandemic, I made that switch. First, I worked in higher education instructional design, and now I work in corporate instructional design. And I'm currently an instructional designer for a company called Blackbaud, which is a cloud software company focusing on social good organizations such as nonprofits, educational institutes, and individual change agents. So I will be our host for the panel asking questions. If you have any questions that you want to ask our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll answer kind of as we get questions that you guys are interested in. Tamaya is our Zoom producer today and will provide useful resources in the chat and monitor for questions. And now I would love for each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about you, your linguistics experience, and kind of what you do now in learning and development. So I don't know if we have a volunteer who wants to go first.
My name is Bozena. I'm the VP of Learning and Curriculum at Duolingo. My background, is in linguistics. I have a PhD in linguistics, and then I spent some time in the academia. I did a postdoc in brain and cognitive sciences, and then worked in a linguistics department as a lecturer and researcher before joining Duolingo. And I've been at Duolingo for 9 years now.
I'm Althea Davis. I got my master's degree. I went to North Carolina State University and graduated in 2023. But I started my professional journey and my higher ed journey back in Michigan at Michigan State, where I dual majored in elementary ed and early childhood development. Then I was an elementary school teacher for 5 years. I was in Chicago and then Denver, and I taught ESL K through 5. And then I came to North Carolina, where I got my master's degree. And during all of that, I stayed connected with folks at Michigan State. And I'm lucky enough during my master's degree, my master's program, I continued to work with the linguistics program there. And so during that time, I sort of moved around in my position in the team, but I am currently working on developing curriculum for the Michigan Diaries project, which you might know is a sociolinguistics project, collecting linguistic and social data from Michiganders of all walks of life. And I have also worked at PBS North Carolina as the Education Services Program Manager. So a wide range of experiences in my past, and I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor, and I have been focused mainly on working in English as a second and foreign language as a part of my curriculum design. I was teaching in Germany, Iceland, Finland, and now I found myself teaching in Taiwan. I mostly did English, but I've done a little bit of German, and I've primarily focused on working with corporate clients, so very often actually traveling to companies such as Airbus, Vattenfall, HSH, Nordbank, and very often working with clients who usually had to communicate with people in foreign countries, whether they're working people in England or France, whether native speakers and non-native speakers. And so that's kind of been primarily my area, is working with those types of clients, actually focusing on getting real communication. And then kind of found myself in kind of a reverse, and now I've landed at a university and did a master's in linguistics, originally thinking I'd go into becoming a professor, although I've decided not to do that. So I kind of went around and did the private work first, or went into industry first, and now found myself in academia, but going back into it. And any projects I'm working on, I'm a part of something called the the Taiwan English Extensive Reading Association. That's what we are big proponents of something called extensive reading, which is a way of getting lots of input. And we're focused on trying to talk with local teachers on how to input that into the curriculum. Because most curriculum places have a pre-designed curriculum, or it's already pretty set, but how they can kind of work that into it to get better outputs for their students.
Amazing. Thank you guys. So I know a lot of people, one of the things that they're trying to figure out as they move from academia into like a non-academia job is figuring out how to like get that first job. So I'd love to hear from everyone. How did you find your first learning and development job, or how did you find your first non-academic position? Was it through like networking? Did you just cold apply via LinkedIn? So kind of what was your process for finding that first job?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and go first. I just finished talking, but for me was I decided I wanted to go into language teaching. I didn't know if I wanted to do it long term as a career, but I definitely knew it's something that I wanted to give a shot for a couple of years right out of finishing my bachelor's degree. And so it was actually done through cold applying. Actually, first it was looking into what country I wanted to go to. And I lived in Germany before and I wanted to go back to Germany. So I started looking around for companies that hired language teachers. I originally wanted to teach German, as that's what I'd kind of learned, but they actually only wanted native speakers of the language. I'm a native English speaker. So I went completely unprepared, didn't know anything about English grammar, but looked for a bunch of companies. I found out in Germany there's a bunch of companies and how the market is. And just from there, I cold applied and I actually got up and moved to Berlin and just I gave myself enough money for 3 months to survive and hopefully land a job. So that way I could be available for an interview. This was back in 2007. So it's pre-Zoom and all those days when you had to actually go and drive to the company. So it was just cold applying and then waiting for people to call back. And finally, one of them, I ended up calling or they ended up calling me and I went to it and it was just seemed to be a good fit. And as a city I didn't know anything about was Hamburg at the time. And I was actually like 1 week before my money was over and I had to leave to go back to the US and sleep on my parents' couch. So that was really kind of, oh, great, they're offering me a job. I have to take it, whether I like it or not in the long term. But that was my first start.
I love that you took a country first approach by figuring out where you want to live and then using that to like narrow down your job search. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to like the teaching industry, if that's something anyone ever wants to get into, because every country has there's its own culture around what the teaching is, like what age, what to do, as well as how to get work and how to get visas. And they have different countries will have different requirements on that. So it's kind of one of those things. It's a good idea to start getting a country in mind and then looking at it from there. So like in Taiwan now, it's mostly kids. So it's like if you don't want to teach kids, don't come to Taiwan. And if you want to teach more adults, it's okay, go to Europe. That's going to be more the adult one. So yeah, it's definitely, I found a country first has been the best way to go about language teaching work.
Anyone else want to share their job experience?
Yeah, I think that experience of first job out of academia often is that scrambled, oh my goodness, last minute, finally I've got a job and a place to live and an income. It's so exciting. I have a unique path because I did undergrad and then I taught for 5 years and then went to my master's degree. So I'm going to speak more on the experience after my linguistics, my master's degree in linguistics, which was just last year. A lot of my process was networking. I'm very much like a social individual and I really value personal connection a lot. So that is the route that I took, mostly in trying to understand what's available out there, what's possible, what options are there. But I also integrated lots of just cold applying through LinkedIn, going to lots and lots of job boards. The amount of time that I spent on certain like ed tech job boards was, my computer knows what I was doing. And so like a lot of just keeping my eye out on different job boards. But when I found the job at PBS, which I recently left, it was the absolute perfect position for me. So I got extremely lucky that I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone that was at PBS, and sort of shared that job with me, and it was just an absolute perfect click. And so I kind of had the center of all of those Venn diagrams, I would say, is I was cold calling, definitely. I was cold applying via LinkedIn and different job boards, but I also used a lot of my networking, and then I got a job that I really liked.
Okay, I guess my turn. So my only job outside of academia is my current job at Duolingo. So that's what I can talk about. So at the time when I applied, I was a researcher, a lecturer. I wasn't really actively looking for other jobs, but I was having doubts whether the academic path is for me. I mean, I had doubts, like probably many people throughout grad school, throughout my postdoc later on. So I stuck around for a while in academia, but I always had this feeling that, well, it's maybe not exactly the best fit for me. I really wanted something that maybe moves a little bit faster, so faster pace of the work, something where I can see the immediate impact of my work. Just academic work, well, unfortunately, feels very slow. It's a little bit hard to stay motivated. So I um, well, I had a conversation with my husband about it. I mean, many conversations actually over the years, but that one conversation was essentially, yeah, like what should I, well, what should I do? I'm not sure. Do I want to stay in academia? And he basically asked me, well, if you wanted to, if you worked somewhere in industry, like what company would you want to work for? And Duolingo came to mind immediately because I was using it. I thought, oh yeah, I actually have the right skills. My research was all about language learning, how people learn languages in adulthood. And so that felt like, yeah, I could probably contribute there. So in that conversation, we just looked at Duolingo's careers page, and there was, I mean, it was written in the stars, apparently. There was a job just written like for me. Um, uh, they were looking for someone with a PhD in linguistics, someone with experience teaching languages, and basically everything was right. And so I just applied. I decided that's just an opportunity I need to take. Um, and and then everything moved really fast. I got invited to an interview, and then I got the job. So I didn't really have that much time to even think about it, but no regrets. That was really the best decision I made. Um, so I know my path maybe isn't the most usual because I only applied for that one job without really looking for other jobs. But now over the years at Duolingo, I've hired a lot of people. I've hired a team of over 40 people myself. I've interviewed a lot of people, so happy to share advice for how to go about it.
I love that everyone had such like really different experiences with finding that first job. So it just goes to show that like as you're looking for your first non-academia job, like there's no one path to get that job or to like start that non-academic career. I can share a little bit about my experience. I transitioned into instructional design in 2020 because my department was actually doing layoffs. They were getting rid of everyone whose contract was up for renewal that year because they just didn't have the budget anymore because they weren't getting enough students coming into our department. And so it was like me and six other people. They were like, we're not going to renew your contracts for the upcoming school year. And I was like, okay, cool. And then went into panic mode, like overdrive, like I need to find something, I need a job. So I just started applying to any single job that I thought I was like remotely qualified for, and landed on instructional design by accident and thought, I will do this for 1 year, maybe 2 years, and if I don't like it, I'll find something new. But I love it, so I've been doing that for about 4 years now and started in higher education and made the transition into corporate because I wanted to be full-time remote. That was my driving factor for my current position. Yeah, it sounds like everyone had such really differing experiences. One thing or one question that I usually get when I talk to people about what I do as an instructional designer or a curriculum designer is like, what do you even do during the day? What does your day look like? So I'd love to hear from everybody in your current position, in non-academic positions. How is your day-to-day or your projects that you're working on different than in academia?
Well, in my current job, so my current job essentially is kind of higher level, more strategic management. And so right now, mostly I'm in a lot of meetings, but I know when people hear meetings, it sounds really boring. And actually, it's not like that at all. It's a lot of exciting meetings where we discuss the direction for the company, the specific goals that we want to achieve. And then there are other meetings where I act more as an advisor, guiding our teams on the work they are doing, how to exactly implement certain things. We're building different learning experiences, building courses. Duolingo is now expanding to math and music. And so there's a lot where, for me, also very exciting thinking generally about learning and how to apply what we've learned about teaching languages to teaching math, to teaching music. So my current job is really a lot of that, talking to people, advising them, thinking about the high level. But throughout the years, of course, I had a very different job. I feel like every year, basically, my job was very different. When I just started, it was just me. I was the only one person in this kind of role. And so it was very much working in the weeds on thinking through our methodology, creating courses, even myself, course content, uh, designing studies to evaluate the effectiveness of what we're doing. And so I did a lot of the work that was actually very similar to what I did in academia. Designing studies and measurements and analyzing data. So that was actually very very nice and exciting. And then I went to growing my team, managing people, and so gradually doing less and less of the as we call it, individual contributor work to what I'm doing now.
Awesome, thank you.
From mine, my job is mostly around teaching. And so it's actually implementing what I put up in my curriculum, as well as all the lesson planning. So it depends on the job that I've had. Now that I'm in a university, I have to do all my curriculums before the semester starts, which is kind of a strange thing where I suddenly have, okay, I've got 6 classes and I have to get everything ready. Whereas in other jobs, the courses would be kind of spread throughout the year. I'd be teaching classes, and then so they said, hey, we've got some new clients coming in, so we need to start a new class. So I'd be teaching, but then also knowing that I have a new class coming up in a few weeks. So then I start designing a curriculum for that new class. And so from there, it's usually starting off, and sometimes I may go straight into just teaching, or it's for that day, of course, looking over what I have to do for the day, like what are the goals that we're trying to meet for the class. And then sometimes there's the bigger lesson planning, kind of like the macro. Then there's also the minor, like the day-to-day. Okay, before I'm going into this next hour, what is the exact paperwork I need to do, and what is it that I need, as well as looking at, okay, what's for the week, what am I going to do? And so it's kind of everything that I have to do for curriculum is really spread throughout the week in between the classes that I'm teaching. So after I'll teach a class for an hour, 2 hours, then it's go back and, okay, what's my next class? Got to prepare for that one, looking at the syllabus I created, but also I leave enough room where things have to change, because sometimes you have something in mind and it just doesn't work. And you have to also, with teaching, very much be on the fly, because some things are just going to fall. With one class you teach, it goes swimmingly, and literally the next hour you do it and it falls completely flat and it's just not working. And you have to, on the fly, kind of like know your students or your clients, and then like be like, okay, what's a last minute lesson I can do that maybe fits with the overall theme of what we've planned, but something different that they might engage with more than what I had originally done. Sometimes you got no choice, you have to just go through it. Other times you can say to the students, okay, this isn't working, stop, let's do something else, and just kind of completely change. So that's pretty much it. It's just each day, sometimes depending on the job, some jobs are every day is exactly the same, and some jobs every day is different. It just really kind of depends what you're going into, what you have that day. So when I was like, for example, teaching in Germany, I would have like many clients, I saw them once a week. So I'd go in, I might only have 3 classes at the company I have to teach. Some is it's all day long where I'm teaching the students who are doing we had unemployment classes. They could take extra English classes to help get them jobs, and they have their own curriculums and designs. So you're constantly switching back and forth from everything that you're doing, trying to keep that in mind and then jump into it, which is nice if you're a person that really likes that creativity and you don't want the same thing every single day. So that's about what teaching is like.
Yeah, a lot of flexibility and switching it up last minute.
Very much, yeah. That happens a lot more than you would like, and sometimes it's your fault, and sometimes it's absolutely not your fault, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And I have walked into classrooms not knowing the students, because it was like they said, "Oh, teacher just got into an accident on the way here. Can you cover for the teacher?" When it's a class start, it starts in 1 minute, and it's just like,
Gotcha.
okay. Didn't go walk into a class not knowing any of the students, not knowing their level, or maybe having a general idea, and then having to pull off a lesson that, again, these are also private companies, so they're going to expect a quality lesson. And if it looks like it's rushed, looks like you don't know what you're doing, then of course they're going to complain. So it's kind of like, yeah, definitely that does happen, but it can be frustrating, but it can be exciting and challenging. And sometimes I've walked into classes and put together a new class or different material that I had used separately, but I now realize there's a link and can be used, and I can make a whole new lesson based around that. So a lot of really good, interesting ideas that I've then later implemented from those chaotic classes have sometimes worked out really well.
Great, thank you.
I really enjoy that y'all sort of have such different experiences with that. And I think that shows the variety of day-to-day life as, you know, in curriculum and learning design. I very much relate to that being on the fly as an ESL, like as an elementary school teacher, but specifically as an ESL teacher. I taught all different classes. So I taught kinder through 5th, and I was always I was always adjusting to the different needs of each classroom. So I relate to that fully. But I also have been in the more corporate side at PBS, where a lot more meetings were taking place and a lot more thinking and a lot more conversations around how to design something rather than hands-on in classroom experience. So I would say that my day looks different depending on which project I'm working on. Right now, in the MI Diaries experience, we're sort of taking it a little bit more slowly and a little bit more part-time because it's just one of the projects that the entire program is working on. It has looked different depending on what part of the project we're in. Right now, I'm developing a little bit more of the team, and I'm doing more program management, project management, laying out the whole outline of what we're gonna do, like our scope of what the plan is, and sort of outlining the different timelines and plans for each lesson, which is very different from how I did my master's thesis, which was creating a curriculum for 8th graders in linguistic diversity, specifically for North Carolina linguistic diversity. And in that, I worked with my instructor or my advisor, but I also was a team of one and completely constructed it from top to bottom for the whole curriculum. Whereas the MI Diaries experience is a little bit more forthcoming, is a little bit more emergent as we're going. So we're doing it like chunk by chunk rather than having the full scope of the curriculum built out from the beginning. So I think curriculum design, instructional design, teaching can definitely vary depending on what project you're working on and what day you're living in.
Yeah, I totally agree about the like flexibility, the having to like change it up at the last minute. And I found that as an instructional designer, it kind of depends on the organization that you work for as well. When I worked in higher education ID, my entire day was relationship management. So I would be on meetings with professors all day, every day, like 8 hours of meetings because they needed a lot of like hand-holding to design their online courses. Versus now in corporate instructional design, my day is I'll be honest, it's a little boring. This panel is probably the highlight of my workday today because otherwise I'm not in a client-facing position. I don't really have supervisory duties, so I don't really talk to that many people during the day. It's just all clicking around my computer and just doing course design, which is wildly different from when I was a teacher because I would spend all day talking to students and walking around campus. So it kind of depends, but it's a really big switch for me personally, going from academia to like a corporate job. It's just a different way to go about your day. Let me see. Sorry if the questions are kind of jumping around a little bit. I know there are so many aspects of like the job search and things like that that people are really interested in. So I would love to know. Hold on, sorry, one second. I've been writing questions as we've been talking. So Althea mentioned like project management as part of what she does during her day. And when I was in academia, I did not know what project management was. I had never heard of it. So I'm wondering if there are any skills that you've had to learn sort of like on the fly in your current job that you didn't even know existed when you were in academia or just aren't really a part of like academic life, if that makes sense. Like having to learn about like agile project management, daily stand-ups, things like that. So I'm wondering if there's anything that we should pre-research before jumping into like that non-academia job.
Yeah, my first position outside of my master's at PBS absolutely introduced a whole slew of skills and talents that I didn't know I had inside me. Let's just put it that way, optimistically. There was, yeah, project management was something that I wholeheartedly think I was subconsciously growing as an educator. And then during academia as well, I think as students specifically, you're required to manage your own project. You're required to be an independent thinker, an independent creator, an independent organizer of your own content. So there was a lot of skills already built in there. And then once I joined an organization that had some suggested structures of how to organize or how to project manage, it all sort of fell into place of what it's supposed to look like. But there's also myriad ways that you can project organize or project manage. But yeah, I would definitely say the first job outside of academia definitely introduced me to the whole world of different corporate processes and terminology and skills that I now am able to take into my next position.
So thank you. Anyone else have any non-academic things they've had to learn on the fly in their current job?
Mine was customer service. And I've noticed that, especially compared to the other professors I'm teaching with who've been in academia their whole life, that it's different when you're teaching and you have the paying customer right in front of you. And sometimes what they want and what you feel they need are not aligned. And so there's the customer service aspect of the work and trying to bridge that gap. Sometimes it's on the fly, sometimes it's building relationships with the people, but they're like, okay, I don't want to be learning this, or I've already learned it 10 times before. It's like, well, but you haven't acquired it yet. So it kind of still needs to be there. Or they're like, well, I want to be able to do ABC. And it's like, well, yes, but in order to do that, there are other language skills you have to adapt first before you can actually start doing that. A lot of them like, oh, I want to be doing business stuff. I want to learn negotiations. Like, why am I learning colors? I'm like, well, because your English is that low, you can't begin to negotiate if you cannot form a basic, the difference between using a present tense and a past tense, or how to politely request something versus a demanding statement. So that has been one of the biggest things that no one really prepared me for. Just with my first job, they said, just remember, you represent the company, and it's kind of goes around the customer is king, sort of. But there's kind of they give us a few tips on how to work with it, but a lot of it's just been kind of building up on my own how to work with the people and find ways to try to get them happy. And it works most of the time, but I have had the occasional customer slam their book and storm out of the class and go complain to the front desk. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. But I've gotten much better at managing those. So I think I haven't had anyone storm out or complain. And yeah, it's probably been about 8 or 9 years. So yeah, it doesn't happen. It happens a little bit in the beginning.
For me, definitely a lot of things that I had to learn. Everything that came with this work being so fast-paced and collaborative. And so there is definitely a lot that goes into you organizing your time. So, I mean, project management, that's all it is, really making sure that you move your projects forward in this situation where there's just so many things to do and there's so many distractions, and you use Slack and there are meetings and there's email and you need to keep track of all of it, of all those different conversations, of all the different projects, all the feedback you're giving, the feedback you get. So there's just a lot going on. And I've always felt like I'm an organized person. I can keep track of everything. But it was still a little bit difficult to adjust to this kind of chaos. And that's also what I see in people who join Duolingo, who come straight from academia, that's often like this hard adjustment. But there are many resources, so that's useful. Many people know about different tools you can use for something like project management. So there's a lot of support for that. And I would say another thing that's also been a big adjustment is how to communicate with all the collaborators. I mean, really at Duolingo, that's when I learned the true meaning of collaboration. When you really come together with people who have very different skill sets, and you do need everyone to collaborate because all the pieces are important, and you need to communicate, you need to listen to each other, and you need to arrive at some good solution yourselves together. And that communication piece it's just really difficult. You have to learn how to do it. How do you explain your own point of view, your own expertise in plain words, in a way that others without this kind of background can understand? So there's definitely a learning curve, and I'm still learning how to do it, honestly. And that's another thing I see for people who come straight from academia. That is another thing that's a bit of a challenge, and it takes some time to figure out. So definitely investing in communication skills is good early on, but really communication skills, like think about talking to someone who does not know anything about your subject of expertise.
I love that. I think you said you have been at Duolingo nine years, and you're still learning a lot about like project management, communication. So it shows that it's a really like there's no like switch that you flip when you get that non-academic job. Like you don't know everything immediately. You are definitely still learning a long way into your career. For me, the biggest kind of learning curve was working with subject matter experts, because when you are in academia, when I'm like in the classroom teaching, I am the subject matter expert. So students come to me and I can answer something and I have all the knowledge that they need. But now working in instructional design, I work on technical software products that I don't know a lot about. So I have to refer to my subject matter experts, and they don't know anything about trying to teach the technical knowledge to other people. So we have to kind of like learn how to meet in the middle to figure out how to explain highly technical concepts to learners, what their baseline is, and just like communicating with them and making sure they're on track because they're my subject matter experts. So it's all been a really big learning experience. We have a couple questions in the chat, so we'll look at these.
I'm super quick to what you're saying, Erin.
Oh, yeah.
I think also something I experienced was, even if you are an expert in the content, like I worked a lot with instructional design on early childhood education in my previous position. And it was important for me to take a step back from being the person who wears every single hat to someone who's highly skilled in designing this curriculum, or allowing other folks to be the experts in the moment. That was a skill that I had to develop too. So in both ways, you have to trust the subject matter expert. So that's a great point.
Yeah, having to give up sort of like control of knowledge, I think it was really difficult for me switching from teaching to non-teaching. So one of the questions is about like work-life balance, which I think is an amazing question. So do you find yourself tied to work in the way that I feel like I'm tied to emails from my students? Are you able to turn off at the end of the workday and just be done, especially for anyone who works remotely, or even if you work in office? What is sort of the work-life balance difference now versus when you were in academia? I think that's a great question.
With my experience with work-life balance, yes, it was very easy to shut off at the end of the day. Especially when you're working with like corporate clients. You've prepared that day, you teach it, and as someone else had asked a question, is there a lot of grading and evaluations? And with corporate clients, there isn't, because these are people who are paying to learn a language. So it's really more about you just show up and you're giving them lessons to actually work on. There isn't no, do you pass, do you fail, except maybe at the very end of the class, they just do a little something to see if they're good enough to go to the next level. But because of that, you're able to just teach. And then when you're not teaching, completely shut off. Because there was no homework, there's not a lot of else going on, or any extra, not too much in the way of projects unless you take them on yourself. So it's a little bit easier. I find it easier to make myself work on projects if it's something that I've chosen to do compared to when it's been assigned to me. But that's been not very often. The one area that can struggle with work-life balance, and this depends again on the country and the company. I've had some jobs where I get to keep most of my work between 8 to 5. And so I've got my evenings free and my weekends free. But I've also been in situations where I am teaching also only 8 hours, but it's spread between 7 in the morning and 10 o'clock at night. In which case, yes, you can still shut off after work, but you've got an hour to teach, and then you've got 2 hours of nothing to do. Or maybe you're traveling to the client site, and that gives you a couple hours work there, and then you got the next class in 3 hours later back at the main office. So with that, and that was working in Germany, there's a lot of travel involved. But yes, once work was over, I could shut off, but sometimes you were working weekends, sometimes you were working well into the night until you got like a couple years in. You got to work with the schedulers. You got a little bit of rapport with some of the clients who regularly asked for you, and it was much easier to then get a schedule that was mostly in the mornings and afternoons. But that took a couple years to get to that point.
For me, definitely, in academia, I felt like I did not have a work-life balance. There was just no point at which I would turn it off. And when I started at Duolingo, it was just like a transformation. I had my time in the office. That's when I worked. There was no expectation. There's still no expectation for me to work in the evenings or the weekends. So it's very easy to have that work-life balance. And of course, I still sometimes do work in the evenings or weekends. There's some deadline, and there's maybe some extra work I need to do. But mostly, it's actually really great. You can just separate those very well.
I just on a personal level, I struggle with that, the work-life balance. I think a lot of folks in academia, from switching that, like you were just saying, the balance of, oh, this is my entire job, this is my entire life of academia. It's definitely a strange adjustment, and this is also true for folks who are educators as well. I think as a whole, educators struggle with that balance because we see the time in the classroom as the work time, and then outside of the classroom you have all this free time to do your lesson planning, or all this free time to do the rest of your job. And so I think adjusting from that mindset into having a 9 to 5, having a set amount of time, is definitely a process that I have learned to develop during my time outside of academia and outside of the classroom. So be patient with yourself.
I totally agree with everyone who's been talking about like it being in academia or higher education, the like really bad work-life balance. So I struggled with that also as an instructor in higher education. And honestly, I still struggle with that 4 years out. Especially like when I was an instructor, I would have to like beg for a personal day off if I needed it because you have to get someone to cover your classes. You still have to check in with your students, things like that. So it's still really hard for me to like take vacation time. I always feel guilty about it. I should stop feeling guilty about that. But work-life balance is a lot easier now. But in a remote job, it is still really hard because like there's no work home separation. So I've had to work really hard to create those boundaries for myself. So I have a specific like end of workday ritual that I do that kind of helps me like mentally transition from workday to home life. But even with that, it's still like way, way better. I have an actual like work life and home life and social life now that I'm not in academia anymore. Another question from our chat. What are some advantages of a linguistics training over like an education degree when it comes to instructional design or curriculum development? If anyone has a burning answer to that.
Yeah, I posted a little bit in there, at least when it comes to language education. And Bill Van Patten says this very well, is that language is not subject matter. If you're actually trying to get people to acquire language skills, it's not something you can't just say, okay, we're going to be learning this grammatical structure, and then we're going to build on it from here, because the brain is really going to acquire what it wants to acquire when it's ready to. So I think that's one of the failings with some of my colleagues who have more of the educational thing, because a lot of what's used to maybe teach math and what's used to teach science is then brought over into language. And when it comes to getting students to acquire language for communicative purposes, that kind of linear structure I find does not work very well. So having linguistics has really helped me in that I have a better understanding of just language as a whole. And so, and knowing the research on second language acquisition, I've been able to better develop curriculum based on what I know are the ideal circumstances that students and learners need to acquire the language, rather than, okay, this is the grammar structure I want you to acquire, start studying this. And so it's a little bit more organic. That part has definitely helped. And the second thing is, I'm much better able to understand the errors that my students make, and really kind of finding out what those are, and then being able to try to find ways to help correct that. So, like for example, a lot of students, they want help with their pronunciation, and actually quite a few have good pronunciation. But once I took my phonology courses, I started realizing, oh, there was mistakes. Like a lot of students were using more marked syllable structure compared to unmarked syllable structure. That's just kind of natural that you'd take the coda and move it to the onset, but they weren't doing it because they were memorizing these chunks of words and then adding on the morphemes to it, but they didn't change where the syllable went. And that gave it kind of a non-native flavor that sometimes sounded very stilted. It wasn't until I had my phonology classes that I was able to sit there and actually listen and be like, oh, wait, now I hear what the issue is. It's not a pronunciation issue. It was a phonology issue. And going to talk to them about that and providing the input they needed for it. And even like syntactically, when I would hear mistakes, I was like, why are they making that mistake? Well, then it's like, oh, well, okay, now I see why, because they had an issue with the determiner phrase and they were overgeneralizing the determiner. And so I felt I had a better, fuller understanding of what was going on inside my students' head, and to really engage the curriculum around that. Whereas before, I used to do very much linear, this is the first thing, this is the second, this is the third, and I've realized now that's not how language works. And so it's completely revamped how I go about my curriculum.
So thank you.
Yeah, kind of building off of that, sort of context is honestly has been extremely important for me. My degree is in sociolinguistics, so bringing in that experience of linguistic bias, linguistic diversity, and really reassessing, sort of prescriptivist thoughts that I had going into teaching and education, and understanding backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds of everyone who's coming into whatever curriculum you're designing or whatever instructional design you have. So understanding the structures that you need to have in place and understanding the developmental phrases, like Taylor was saying, like having the idea of what does typically happen, but then having that sociolinguistic background really helped me understand nuance of it all. And yeah, the social aspects of language, not necessarily always to have a student or the learner reach a certain standard of naturalized language, which, as we know, is not real, but sort of understanding where they're coming from and bringing them where they would like to be.
And actually, something I want to do that real quick because I just thought of it because you mentioned also like the sociolinguistics. It wasn't until I also had sociolinguistics and discourse that I realized that a lot of teachers don't teach that. It's not in the course textbooks. It's very much, this is the grammar, this is the vocabulary, and students don't actually know how to communicate in a real setting. How do you negotiate for meaning when there's a breakdown? And which is even like with my case being in Taiwan, people speak, they are not direct and completely go around the subject matter. And I have a hard time interpreting that. And even asking my Chinese teachers, can you teach us this? And even they're like, no, we don't know this. They're not even aware of it. They're like, we just teach you grammar and vocabulary. You'll pick it up on your own. So that's definitely also helped me include a lot more stuff from discourse and pragmatics and sociolinguistics that I was not even aware of before.
And on my side, yes, also very similar. That linguistic background is very helpful. I mean, we only hire people for those roles who have that experience. We don't hire just kind of general education experts. We hire people who have a lot of experience teaching languages, understanding language, and then we do the same for math, the same for music. That being said, once you are a Duolingo, we have actually had those cases where someone is just so great at understanding our product, our methodology, that it was useful to move them from language to the other subjects that we are now teaching, math and music, and maybe they already had some background in music, but just then they are then helping with other subjects, but it's a slightly different role. They are not the expert. We still want to hire an expert in a curriculum designer for music specifically, but then those kinds of people can really be helpful. Like you can bring your expertise just like now in how to generally create courses on Duolingo, like how to create courses on Duolingo with our methodology. So I would say there is also that like your career can evolve in different ways. But to me, the way to get started is really have strong expertise in a subject like language.
I feel like I have kind of an opposite experience because I don't really use linguistics at all in my job anymore. So people are always really shocked and surprised when I tell them my master's degree is in linguistics. They're like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. What I personally use like from my linguistics education and background is just like the ability to communicate with diverse groups of people. That's been the most helpful for me in my career so far, especially because I do a lot of technical writing in my role. So I'm taking like really difficult, complex topics, which we all know about because we've all had to try and explain grammar to people who don't know anything about grammar. So it's the same thing. You're taking something really difficult and trying to make it palatable for diverse audiences of different like levels of knowledge. So that, and then just being my department's go-to like grammar nerd. I find that I get a lot of requests for peer reviews from my colleagues because I am very good at language. So I do a lot of writing and like communication within my department. So outside of that, I don't use a lot of linguistics except being a word nerd. Yeah. And then Emily had a comment kind of going off what Taylor was saying. So could you start with curriculum design for language teaching and then pivot into design for other subjects? I have an opinion on that, but if anyone else has an opinion, I'd love to hear it.
Anyone else wants to start? I don't want to be talking too much in this.
Oh, go for it. So yeah, if you start with language teaching, do you think you have the ability to pivot to curriculum design for other things?
Yes, I believe you can, and that's mainly because a lot of at least when it comes to the curriculum design and language education, a lot of it is built around the way other subjects are taught. So with my first job, I was working at a company called Berlitz, and they use the kind of the present, practice, performance method, which in hindsight now I don't think is the best for language teaching, but that's what they did. And so they actually had the pre-designed curriculums first. And so that allowed me to focus on teaching while that was already there and kind of get a sense of it. And since then, doing more reading into skills acquisition theory and curriculum design, I found that that initial learning actually still carries over to a lot of other subjects. So I definitely think it is possible, but it is also going to depend on maybe what company or setting that you're in first. So if I were to run my own language school and someone were to come in and learn to do curriculum design from me, now knowing what I know about language, it probably wouldn't be as good, simply because I kind of throw out a lot of what is traditionally used for curriculum design for non-language subjects. But I find most companies still do use the same thing that other subjects do.
I mean, for me, what I mentioned earlier, that, we do at Duolingo, if you do start in a particular subject, I mean, we've had cases of people transitioning to other subjects. So yes, that's definitely possible.
Yeah, the foundational skills of how to build a curriculum, how to build and design instruction, I think are transferable. And like you were saying earlier, being the subject matter expert isn't always necessary for creating that content. And when you're a subject matter expert in curriculum design, then you get to bring that skill into whichever environment you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. I think once you have that sort of baseline curriculum experience, you can pivot it into a ton of different industries, whatever you are interested in. So you don't have to stick to one specific industry or one area. It's applicable to a lot of different areas. I missed this question earlier, so I want to make sure I get to this. I'm curious whether international students would have opportunities in curriculum design if they need visa sponsorships. I don't know if anyone has any insight to that. I can share a little bit about what I know personally on the corporate side, which is that most companies that I've worked with or that I've seen don't do visa sponsorship. So I'm not really sure what opportunities are available. I know that certain companies have different different branches in different countries. Like my company has a branch in a few different countries, so you don't need visa sponsorship for those particular branches, but to work in the US based organization, we don't do visa sponsorship, but I'm not really sure kind of like in other different types of organizations.
I mean, in general, at Duolingo, we do sponsor visas, but only for some roles, because really the visas that are realistically possible to get are more in STEM. And so for engineers, for, though data scientists, these kind of more technical roles. For these other roles, unfortunately, it's just not easy to get them. And so we don't sponsor them, but we also, like what Erin was saying, we do have offices in other countries. And so that's also a possibility. But of course, we open a position in that specific country. You can't just apply to a position in the US and then, hope that, oh, can I work from, Berlin? So there are some possibilities, but unfortunately, not in general.
Yeah, I would say even for remote positions where like logically you could work from anywhere in the world, you still have to be based within the specific country of the job that you're applying for, unless there's like a really special exception for that position.
Or if you're getting into the language teaching aspect, that's actually very easy to get visas. And if so, because very often in the market, and it's quite unfortunate, but that a lot of schools and the customers want native speakers of the language you're teaching. And so when it comes to getting visas for jobs, very often the company, of course, has to prove that there isn't a local that can do the job. Now, when it comes to if you're teaching your native language, there's much less locals who are able to do the job. So like in my experience, getting visas when I was teaching in Germany and Finland and Taiwan have been extremely easy to get. And I have met other people who were French teachers or Chinese teachers, and for them, it was much easier because they can apply to language schools. And very often the language schools do have a relationship with the immigration offices because most of their employees are going to be international students or international workers coming over there. So that if the teaching is one thing you're interested in getting into, then yes, that can be much easier.
We had one question here about curriculum design. So did you learn curriculum design as part of your educational background, or did you acquire curriculum design from your working experience? And would you recommend someone who is interested in this kind of work to take courses in curriculum design?
From my perspective, when I think about hiring people, it's not something like courses in curriculum design. That's not something that we necessarily look at, but we do look at experience teaching languages. And so that, I would say, is worth getting some experience in, because those are the kinds of intuitions that you build over years of experience teaching that are just hard to get otherwise. And you can learn other aspects of curriculum design on the job. But again, those intuitions, working with students, actually teaching them, seeing how they react, like that's the kind of experience that we want people to have when they come to Duolingo.
I would say, yeah, I also learned on the job. There were no curriculum design courses. But when it comes to language teaching, luckily there are a lot of companies who their business model is hiring people right out of university to go teach. And sometimes they may fly you to the country or not, but very often for those companies, they already have the curriculum already designed. And so they kind of like might teach you or train you in their method. And that way you get a chance to actually go into the classroom, kind of like what Bozena, sorry, I hope I said your name correctly, that you actually get that classroom experience, but you've got that curriculum already set. And as you kind of go through it and you might switch to different jobs, you can see different curriculums, how they're designed. And then of course, there's plenty of books on top of that. So it's definitely not needed. There are lots of companies that already have the curriculum and they're willing to train you in doing it. And so that's a great first place to get started.
Like I said earlier, my master's thesis is in curriculum design. So I didn't necessarily have any structured classes on that. I worked with my advisor quite a bit, and I sought out a lot of my own independent learning when it came to curriculum design. So I wouldn't say necessarily looking into curriculum design will be more beneficial than having that experience. I think a combination of both is extremely helpful. But I think that searching it out yourself and trying things out and finding different structures that work for you is really helpful. And also different structures that work for different clients or different learners is really helpful as well. So practice makes perfect.
Yeah, I agree with the idea that the curriculum design is something that kind of like happens naturally over the course of your career in academia or in teaching. So it's not something that people usually like set out to learn specifically, in my experience. When you get into instructional design, especially in like corporate instructional design, I always tell people that the curriculum part, the teaching and learning aspect, that's a really specific skill you have that's going to be transferable to this job. The other parts of it, like project management, the technical aspects, like that's really easy to learn. But curriculum design is something that takes a lot more like firsthand experience to do. I want to check. We had a couple other questions. For those of you involved in hiring, do you have some tips on what you're looking for, especially for someone who's mid-career in academia?
I mean, in general, I would say the very first thing is just finding that right fit, that position. I mean, we mentioned, I think this earlier when we talked about our own backgrounds. You need to really find a position that you feel like this is going to be a good fit. And so you can really present yourself in a way that makes it clear that you are a good fit. And that's really important when you prepare your resume. Make it short and make it really tailored to the job you're applying for. I see so many resumes where it's so hard for me to even see, or do they have all the requirements that we listed on the job ad? It seems like people just send those blanket kind of resumes, and that's really the worst thing you can do, because I don't spend much time on each resume, and if I can't find their information, well, I'll just reject. And so making it super clear, adjusting, tailoring your resume is super important. So that, again, it's clear, it's immediately obvious that, okay, this is each bullet point kind of points me to the requirements that were listed. I would also recommend writing cover letters, not long ones, very brief ones, but really to contextualize just a little bit your background and your excitement for the position. I mean, that's also something that we look at a lot. We want to hire people who really want to work at Duolingo, who are excited about it. And if someone just applies and they haven't even used Duolingo and they, it's not going to work out. So make an effort to really show that you are interested in this company, in the product, and convey that in your application. And I would say also apply quickly when you see positions out there, because they fill out pretty quickly. We review applications on a rolling basis. It's not like you apply and there's some period of time when we review. No, it's as applications come in, we review them and we interview people. And so the sooner you apply, the better. So just don't wait, just apply whenever you see the right position. And maybe I'll pause there. I have other advice for interviewing as well, if people are interested.
I don't know if anyone else has been in a hiring position.
Yeah, I would say, so if you're going into, say, the teaching part first, and if you're teaching language and you don't have experience with that at your university job, but you have the curriculum planning part, I would recommend, again, like either on your, probably more in the cover letter, really show that you're a person who is able to follow curriculum. Because a lot of those companies that are taking people who are new to language teaching, they want people that are going to do what is in the classroom mandate and like what's in the curriculum. They don't want people going off and doing their own thing. So if you can somehow show that you're able to follow directions, you're able to follow what the company is telling, that is definitely a good side. Now, if you're someone who's already had plenty of language education experience, and you have that curriculum design part, then I would say definitely show that you don't have to have your hand held, that you can create your own design curriculum, or that you can take objectives that the company wants and you can make sure they're taught, but using your own personal spin. And a lot of companies that once you've had that experience, they want your own personal flair, because some of them do realize that, okay, that's what makes this industry, and it's the teachers. We are the product. And so they want that individual, unique thing that you can bring to it. So again, if you already have that experience, definitely emphasize that you're able to create your own curriculum and that the company will be in good hands if they leave it to you. That would be what I would emphasize.
I think we have like about 5 minutes left. So if all the panelists have maybe just like one thing to share that you wish you had known before you like made your transition out of academia, like looking back on your career transition, what's that one thing where like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known this sooner? Or any piece of like advice that you have for our audience?
Trust yourself. is the number one thing that I would say. I think a lot of the times, especially coming out of academia where it's very competitive, and it's very closely competitive, you're very entwined in the relationships and seeing other people's work and constantly trying to grow in a way that you see the places that you need to grow rather than the places that you already have the competency in. Trust yourself when it comes to the job market. You have lots of skills and experiences that can transfer. And I know I've heard this multiple times throughout different panels and different mixers and meetups throughout this conference already, but don't restrict yourself when it comes to applications or what you might think you might not be qualified for. A lot of the time, companies will say, you know, this number of years of experience or equal educational background, or this specific educational, you know, marker, or this level of or comparable experience. So I think really trusting yourself in what you're going for and allow yourself to grow through that experience is important.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll maybe say quickly a very similar thing that really you already have the right skills. A lot of what you need to do is just learn how to package it, because you have a lot of the right experience. But I think what's useful is to just maybe read more of the kind of business type articles so that you understand more of the lingo. You understand better what people care about, and even just getting familiar with the terminology that's used in companies it's just really helpful in interviews. So I would say, yes, trust that you do have the right skills, and if you're being interviewed, you're being interviewed because you have that right expertise. So just you can make it easier for everyone if you're just kind of embracing more this kind of corporate context.
Great, thanks.
For me, I'm very much, I enjoy the theory aspect of everything I do. I mean, I like that combination of theory and the experimental, and that's something I really wish I had done more of, is actually reading on both second language acquisition, and there's lots of books out there on curriculum design. I mean, there's names for the different types of ways to do it, whether you're doing central design or front or back, and there's needs analysis. And there's a lot of things that some of it was helpful, some of it wasn't, that I had no idea about. And so I definitely wish that I had done a lot more reading on curriculum design and second language acquisition before I had gotten started. I think I would have been a much more effective designer and teacher over the last 15 years I've been teaching rather than the last 5 that I have. Yeah, so definitely do lots of reading.
I think my last final piece of advice for people would be to be patient. Making a career transition of any kind is extremely difficult. And today's market is also extremely difficult. It's a really difficult job market at the moment. So be patient and be kind to yourself, because making a career transition out of academia is really hard. And it takes a lot of time and energy. So you guys are already doing amazing just by attending Linguistics Career Launch. So I want to thank all of our panelists for all of their amazing answers, their thoughtful advice. We will see you later in the week and next week.